Okay, so at this point, we're going to move on to our next keynote on African entrepreneurship space. This one will be given by Ashwin. As you can see, he's the managing director of MEST Africa in Ghana. MEST, in case you're interested, is a Pan-African entrepreneurial training program, seed fund, tech incubator, and hub. And Ashwin joined in 2015 as a technology teaching fellow and has since served as an incubator manager for MEST Accra and director of portfolio support and country director of Ghana. He has a background in computer science and engineering, and he's also worked with Honeywell and helped building startups in India. So good morning to you, Ashwin, or so good afternoon to you. What time is it now? I think I've lost track. Looks like it's 11 o'clock here in Switzerland.
It's 9 a.m. Don't worry about it.
Okay, so good morning. So good morning, Ashwin. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me here, Douglas. And obviously, thank you to the World Innovations Forum team as well for having me here.
Yes, thank you very much for your time. So we have several topics that we can talk about today. Where would you like to start? Could you perhaps explain some of your professional background in a project that you're working on right now?
Sure, yeah, and probably about 2-3 minutes there, and then probably even can open out the questions maybe to the audience as well if they do want to ask. So my name's Ashwin. I'm from India, been raised in India. Went to university in India, started studying artificial intelligence and computer science at an age when people thought I was maybe on drugs. This was in 2008, 2009. Quit university to join my first ever corporate job with Honeywell. Didn't work out too well, so became an entrepreneur at the age of 20. Exited my first company, exited my second company, failed the next three seriously. I think, once you go to the top, it's super hard to come, fall down. So obviously failed, and at that time I had a reality check. Got into, I think, academic systems and academic institutions, so started running very, very marginalized schools and I think underimprovised schools in India. Thereby also moved to Cambodia and the rest of the places in Southeast Asia, and then happened to come upon this beautiful organization called MEST. So MEST is basically an entrepreneurial training program, Douglas. So what we do is we find entrepreneurs across Africa. So we get about 6,000 applications per year. We bring 60 to Ghana. So we bring them to Ghana, completely sponsor them for a year, basically build a cohort mentality for an entire year while training different, I think, entrepreneurs in business, communications, and skills, also in team building, understanding what makes a good team, understanding what makes good employees, etc., so on and so forth. So a lot of the hard skills and the soft skills of becoming an entrepreneur, or whatever's possible in a classroom in 1 year, right? Post which we actually invest in them. So we deploy about seed capital worth 50 to 150K. So it depends on the round, obviously, and it depends on the year as well. So till now, we've deployed about $8 million in seed capital across Africa, across 60 plus investments. Post which they also come into our portfolio, and our portfolio is a two-way street. So one is it has physical hubs, and then it has virtual support. So the physical hubs are in Accra, Lagos, Nairobi, Cape Town, and we will, and soon, obviously, in Abidjan, but obviously due to COVID-19, we're taking a little bit of a break on traveling and expansion. Then in the hubs, we offer basically a roof, shelter, access infrastructure, and obviously Wi-Fi, making sure that entrepreneurs don't have that necessary infrastructure gap to actually succeed, right? While with the virtual support, we're actually helping entrepreneurs actually scale these businesses. So invested in 60 plus businesses, 40 under management right now, exited about 8 businesses. We're actually pretty, I think, confident in understanding that our specialty and our focus comes because we're just laser sharp on just finding entrepreneurs, working with entrepreneurs. People have often asked us, Ashwin, why don't you get into training, et cetera, so on and so forth. And we're like, we're not there for that. We're here just to provide entrepreneurship, understand what actually drives entrepreneurship in these emerging markets, and the context being here, Africa. And actually, we just make sure it happens. The project was obviously founded by a pretty, I think, benevolent leader. It's called Jon Lysigan. He's the CEO of Meltwater. He actually started this company because he was a serial entrepreneur as well. Happened to chance upon Ghana in 2007 and started this program in 2008. From inception to now, we've deployed about $25 million in operational capital as well. So we've actually been across completely, make sure that the entrepreneurs are taken care of, given a stipend, because I think in these markets, often entrepreneurs don't understand that entrepreneurship has to be laser focused. But what they understand over here is entrepreneurship. They think it's multifaceted. So
Mm-hmm.
they try to become hustlers of 20 different opportunities rather than just focusing on one opportunity and scaling it across. So obviously, focus was the biggest agenda on Jorn's, I think, mind, and he operates with a simple principle. And with that, I would probably like to stop the presentation from my end.
Go right ahead.
Is opportunity isn't universal, talent is. So in that case, he really wants to understand that every day there are people out there who, if given the right opportunity and right platform and right standards, will exceed, will excel, will become successful, and eventually will basically be the next change agents on this on the face of the earth.
Great. So it's a very interesting comment. I would like to also follow up on several of the very impressive numbers that you mentioned. You're very positive on development of entrepreneurship in Africa. And yet we just heard also from Emmanuel, many of the stereotypes are exactly the opposite for many, many reasons. Your take on that, what would you say to someone who said, no, 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 you're just being overly optimistic. It's not going to work long term. It will all fall apart.
Again, like I think you also need to understand that as a continent, Africa has more legacy entrepreneurs than any other continent has ever had.
Mhm.
Right? So I think you need to understand that structured jobs here don't exist, payrolls don't exist. People don't know what you're talking about when you talk about a pension or you talk about any of these modern day things, right? So I think
Right.
entrepreneurship actually, again, like I said, I think it's very stereotypical and has a huge bias here. It's similarly like in India as well. Like, why wouldn't you go after a structured job which pays you X, X amount of dollars per month, etc., so on and so forth. But because there is so much systemic change and process change happening, the stereotypes are actually being challenged, right? Like you find yourself in a situation where you can solve the problem, or you can wait for someone else to solve the problem, right?
Mhm.
So what is happening right now is making sure that the youth are actually driven to go solving their problem, right? Just that
Mhm.
immediate vicinity problem. That's what you want. And that being said, I don't think it's a big stereotype. And every year, our application numbers are going up. So that means there
Mhm.
is a positive trend towards entrepreneurship. We started with 300 applications in our first year, we're now getting 6,000 applications, Douglas. So, like, you can imagine that, sure, there might be a stereotype, but also the fact is there are other, I think, parts of, I think, let's say, knowledge sharing and knowledge transferring, which is making entrepreneurship more attractive. Because let's be
Right.
really honest, it is the bite of the bigger apple.
Okay. Yeah, those are very impressive numbers and are very hard to beat. So I'm curious from your perspective. You've seen the corporate life, you've seen Honeywell, you've lived in different countries around the world. You've chosen Ghana, you've chosen the entrepreneurial life. For people listening out there who are perhaps in a similar position, what advice would you recommend to them? What would you say to them?
Don't do what I did.
Yeah,
No,
you say that now looking back and you're smiling. So I think you're quite happy the fact that you experience those ups and downs, which I think is
yeah,
typical of an entrepreneurial life, which you
yeah.
don't get in the corporate life. There's something sort of right down the middle. Is it a question of your personality, do you think? Or is it simply there's more opportunities with entrepreneurship and some of them might also have a downside?
Yeah. So again, like I think like it's heavily dependent on the personality, right? And again, I said that with a smile because I wouldn't recommend anyone else to go down my path because again, the way I reacted to my path often was extreme, often was disastrous. People around me were like, Ashwin, what is happening? After my third startup, I was broken. I
Mhm.
didn't know what I was. I was spent a week drinking at a bar. So like you can just imagine like those things, right? But where I'm sitting at right now, I think switching over from corporate to actually entrepreneurship and then actually supporting entrepreneurship, right? Because that's been my value chain over the last 10 years. I can tell you it's been immensely therapeutic. Like
Mhm.
I feel very motivated to go to work because the thing is, I don't want people to go through what I went, like trying to hustle your first seed round, right? Like it
Mhm.
takes so much time trying to actually justify to investors that you're actually growing when your numbers are completely plateaued, right? Like those kind of things, like, helping people actually understand that is extremely, I think, grateful. But
Mhm.
again, often what happens is, as an investor or as an, let's say, an entrepreneurship supporter, often you put yourself in the feet of the entrepreneur or in the shoes of the entrepreneur,
Mhm.
and thereby also you can still keep that how to say spark in you alive as an entrepreneur, and
Mhm.
that's what drives you at the end of the day, right? So for
Okay.
me, I think my thing is probably I think understand the risks around it. I think balance yourself more emotionally than actually intellectually or physically. I think entrepreneurship is all about an emotional fatigue. It's not about physical, it's not about intellectual. It is purely about emotional fatigue because
Mhm.
when your first customer says no and you're like, oh shit. So it's happening, right? So,
Your beautiful idea that nobody wants. Yeah, your beautiful product that nobody wants. Okay, so you have these impressive numbers. I imagine actually trying to manage them is an extreme challenge. What are your prospects for the next 6 months, 1 year? And again, let's take COVID out of the picture for the moment. What are you looking at right now? What's working? What's not working so well? What directions are you going?
So we basically are currently in a position right now where we are one of the leading partners for a lot of organizations in Ghana from a development angle to actually, I think, drive impact to them. I think one of the key things which Sean has done over the course of the last 12 years is to deny donor funding for the last 12 years, and he doesn't want to, right? So in that case, it's just very simple as it's his baby, and that's what I love, drive, which is we can still control our narrative on impact. So our narrative on impact is pretty simple. We'll be graduating a class this time in August. They have 17 startups coming out. The midpoint demo day is next day. Super excited, really excited to see how we can actually scale that forward. They graduate in August, so obviously we have a new cohort of companies coming into our portfolio. So obviously supporting them is our biggest and will be our first most priority, and that's where we want it to be. Obviously, the second one right now, obviously, given the fact that there are a lot more operations happening on ground, and you can see, like, I don't know whether you've been noticing the development metrics in Ghana, but they've been scaling heavily across. A lot of development institutions are coming in as well. So a lot of conversations with them about trying to understand, I think, what we need to do together, what we don't need to do together. But I think the biggest goal for us, I think, in 2020 is to make sure that we actually hit our entrepreneurship numbers at least by 2x or 3x. Like, we want to make sure we create more entrepreneurs in the ecosystem.
So your graduating class numbers are quite impressive. Are there particular businesses, industries that are working quite well at the moment in Ghana and others that are perhaps not doing so well?
So again, I think Touchwood, our companies did really well during COVID-19, obviously because there is a lack of digital infrastructure in Africa, and the fact that these guys were ready solutions which are not being utilized, that these guys were on shelf. I think we did really well in Q2. Like, I'm really impressed with all our companies. We just finished our quarterly review, so really happy. But in general, I think agriculture is one of the biggest things which is happening, and MEST was one of the first agri-tech investors in the continent. We invested in our first company in 2016. Jorn and me basically invested in Uber for tractors. So it's basically becoming a big thing right now, agriculture. But the other thing which I'm starting to see right now, which is becoming an even more critical need right now, is obviously around last mile delivery and is around health. But what I'm starting to notice is more around, I think, one-to-one education for, I think, the lower affordable education. So like, that's an area where, like, I'm looking at right now quite heavily from a MEST angle as well as from a personal angle, is how can you go in and reduce the drop-off rates from universities and schools? Because I don't know if you look at the metrics here in Ghana and in Nigeria and especially in West Africa, is 5th grade to 12th grade, there's almost a drop-off of 60% of students. Right? How do you keep those students in school, right? So I think that is one of the biggest focuses right now everyone is thinking about, because at the end of the day, if you can keep those people in school, then you actually have people actually creating jobs at some point, right? Because they're becoming skilled, they're actually going through the entire road. So I think those are the sectors which I would probably put a lot on the higher side. But the last sector, which is, I think, a lot of people don't actually appreciate here, is actually waste. If you look at actually Ghana's, I think, waste economy, we're actually one of the leading waste economies in the world. We have one region in downtown, which is purely dedicated towards e-waste. It is the world's highest e-waste concentration, and it is in Ghana. No one knows about it. So there is a big industry, and I think a big volume coming towards the waste industry as well, Douglas.
Okay, it's been something, it's one of those questions on waste and recycling and upcycling and all these topics have been coming in on the chat over the last 2 days, so it's very interesting that you point that out. And one of the startup pitches that we had was also focusing on reducing, for example, food waste, and it's a topic that is quite important everywhere, actually. So let's talk briefly about how Ghana has been impacted by COVID. I think if I've understood your comments correctly, like everybody else, they weren't quite ready for a switch to a totally online e-commerce infrastructure. Education was mentioned before with Emmanuel saying that there's no access to online sources. We experienced similar things in Europe, obviously. What kind of impacts is COVID-19 having, and how do you think that will positively affect the future?
Yeah. I think I'll be really honest. I think from a government standpoint of view, I think I have immense respect for the government of Ghana. We went into lockdown as early as end of March, right? And I think through April, through mid of May, we completely spent in like super high curtailed movement. And I think the initial numbers were slow, but obviously right now the numbers are picking up because everyone's trying to get back to normal and stuff like
Mm,
that. I think the COVID-19 pandemic hasn't affected Ghana per se immediately. I think it's one of those pandemics here which is going to start affecting us. I think a little bit later than the rest of the world because Ghana as a market, because it's also like, let's be really honest, all the food stuff here is imported. So we actually had containers filled with food here already. So we did not suffer any sort of food shortage. One period, right? The second thing is daily wages really got hit, but the government came across and said, free ECG, free water, you guys can sit at home, chill out and stuff like that at home. But what I've realized about, I think this pandemic, and which is what I think I'm immensely grateful for all our companies being there, is the fact that Ghana is a very human-centric design market. Like you actually look, and if you look at all the solutions that are being designed, they're being designed completely for the Ghanaian market. Like when Uber came to Ghana, it took them 2 years to start becoming a natural household product here, right? Because it wasn't designed for the Ghanaian market. What I've realized is because it's such a human-centric design market, pushing those users to digital wasn't as hard as it would have been. But
mhm,
the fact that there was a pandemic, it just made it easier for us,
mhm.
right?
Right.
So it was like we went in earlier. We would speak to like 60 people in the market, right? Like we'd be like, okay, market ladies, can you start putting your numbers and your ideas and all these things? And they're like, no, we use pen and paper. We want to sign with our customers and stuff like that. COVID-19 hit. We don't want to touch the customer. How do we record our transactions,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
So it's like stuff like that, which actually I think brought a lot about the change. I personally feel in the future there is going to be more and more focus towards digital. Um, I know that I think a lot of I think all the relief schemes which are going to be coming out are going to be more digitally focused. So in
Mhm.
that case, I personally feel it's going to be a pretty good curve for us from here.
Okay, great. So it's something, what you're saying right now is something that we've heard from all the speakers from all the countries, that Corona has put digital simply at the top of the agenda, whether people want it or not. And in many cases, it's actually been a positive force for change, even if it does have some rather unpleasant and dark side effects and downsides. You mentioned briefly the Uber for tractors, and this is probably a great example of human-centered design. Could you briefly explain how that was set up and how that works?
Sure. I think it's not just Uber for tractors, but there's like multiple different things in our. So we have Airbnb for warehouses. So there's like different sort of like localized solutions available for the market. Recently, we just now started working on some sort of a Yelp for pharmacies. So it's like you
Hmm.
basically get to know a pharmacy whether it has its pills or not before you actually get there, because there's a live
Okay,
like feedback
sure,
happening, right? So there's
sure.
multiple different models happening here, but also the fact is because I think most emerging markets are actually leapfrogging markets, right? Like they actually jump over a course of period of innovation, which are actually the Western world. So imagine there are 10 pieces of innovation in the Western world. I particularly believe that there'll be anywhere between 4 to 5 in the emerging market because the emerging market often just jumps over different,
Mhm.
I think different steps, right? So over here, I personally feel that I think the Uber for tractors is one of our biggest examples. We invested in them in 2016. It was a pretty simple. There's no app. It's a digital
Mhm.
service. You basically pick up your USSD and then you tell, "Hey, I need a tractor here. I need it in 2 days. Can you bring it?" Period. Done.
Okay,
Right now we have another startup which is doing like this Airbnb for warehouses. It basically tells farmers 2 days in advance if there's going to be space for them if they start moving their crops,
okay, okay.
right? So it's such simple
Mhm.
solutions which are guaranteed efficiency, right? And which
Mhm.
are guaranteed, like, again, we're not promising a product, we're just promising a service here, right? So in
Mhm.
that case, it's all about efficiency, value for money, and making sure that the service is actually readily available.
And bring it all together digitally sounds great. Okay, Ashwin, thank you very much for those comments. Before we go, if you have one wish or request at the World Innovations Forum, what would you like to see happening in a space like this? Digital conferences, putting together resources, et cetera, et cetera. What are your
Yeah.
visions for the future?
Yeah, so I think the first time I spoke to, I think Axel and Martha, I was so impressed by I think what they were doing, and obviously Martina brought me in. So it was just I think the ambassadors, right? And this is one of the key things which I'm hoping that you guys can actually do is create more of the ambassadors to actually create some sort of shared learning. Like when I look at global shapers or any of those things, like no offense to the community, but I just feel that there's no learning for us externally. Like I'm not part of the global shapers, right? But I think the ambassadors here at World Innovations Forum, because I think you guys have such a digital, I think you guys already have such a digital mandate. I think you guys can share more from your ambassadors, you know, and at the end of the day, your ambassadors are on your feet on the ground. They're actually seeing what's happening. And again, any information, whether it's a blog post, whether it's actually just a newsletter, right, will be just interesting to notice and read.
Okay. Ashwin, thank you very, very much for your wide-ranging comments today.
Thank
Wish you
you.
a very good day back to
You
Ghana.
too.
Enjoy the rest of the morning. Take care of
You too,
yourself.
man. Take care. Thank you
Okay,
guys for
thank you.
having me.
All
Ciao.
right,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.